So welcome everybody. This is the last session of the day, and we will be talking about power grids, electricity grids. Grid infrastructure has been mentioned a couple of times during the day. Actually, every single panel somehow has mentioned the need for good grid infrastructure, and it is fortunate that we have a full panel discussing this. You have headphones. At the moment, you do not need them unless you want translation from English into Chinese. It may well be that at a certain point, our Chinese speaker may decide to intervene in Chinese, and you will get the translation if you need it. Good. So I will introduce my panelists one after the other when I ask them to talk. I would like to start by saying that what we are seeing, it's a major revolution. It's not that we are only having a change in the way we generate, consume, and transmit electricity, but this transformation is impacting society at large. And so when we are looking at how do we integrate an increasing share of renewable in the power sector, we also have to think how can we do it in a way that it is acceptable to people and it is in line with our high interest in protecting the environment. So I would like to start by asking the Minister for Energy of Lithuania, and now you will laugh at my language skill, Vaičiūnas, Mr. Vaičiūnas, what are the key challenges and the key opportunities that you are facing in your country in terms of growing renewable, meeting the climate target, and at the same time, keeping people happy?
Thank you very much for the questions. Before starting, first of all, I would like to refer to a very nice coincidence. Coincidence that today we have this Energy Vendor conference here in Berlin. And in Lithuania, we have so-called the Day of Energy, actually today. And the reason is very simple, because 126 years ago, in 1892, the first electric bulb in the street light was installed. And it's even more nice coincidence that I'm referring to 1882, when the first street light, electric street light, permanent street light, was installed here in Berlin. So just 2 kilometers from the place where we are sitting in the Potsdamer Platz and Friedrichstraße. So this is a nice coincidence, but at that time it was the question of timing, very important. Meaning that 3 years after the electric bulb was invented by Thomas Edison, after 3 years, it was the first permanent street light in the world here in Berlin. Then after 10 years, it was the street light in Lithuania. So at that time, timing was very important. Now the timing has a relevance, and due to digitalization and the innovation of technologies, we are moving forward on the more fast pace. So talking about challenges and opportunities, here, of course, I would like to say very clearly that and about the key things. So, looking forward, what we have now, the opportunities is the reduction of the cost of renewables development. And of course, during recent years, for 5-6 years, we see the dramatic reduction of cost for renewables, meaning for solar panels by 80%. For the wind technologies by 40%, and of course the market is seeing this. And this is quite natural that all the good things is starting to be implemented in the strategic level. And I'm glad to say that we are looking forward to have really ambitious national energy strategy, also to be developed on the regional scale. But in the year 2020, we will have at least 30% of renewables in our energy mix. In the year 2030, it will be about half of all the energy mix will be from renewables. And 2050, it will be about all the energy consumed will be from the renewables. So this is opportunities for our future. And talking about the challenges, of course, one thing is about the integration of renewables to the grid. So that's the challenge of our century. And of course, the question is about not only about the society, this is about also preparedness of our DSOs, of our regulators, to be as flexible as possible. And here sometimes we need not technologies are developing, but our minds, our approach also to be changed. So this is one fact. Another fact is, of course, when we are talking about the opportunities, this is about the regional cooperation, which is not, we are not taking enough at the current stance, because in our experience, regional cooperation was of key importance. We built interconnectors with the Nordics, we built interconnectors with Poland. This was a reduction of the prices. And of course, looking forward on the development of renewables, this year we established the Baltic balancing market. This is a nice opportunities to have a cheaper, cost-efficient balancing of renewables. Of course, looking forward, one of the key things is about talking about challenges. This is about sharing of the data, sharing of the data between our transmission system operators, DSOs, TSOs, and of course this is a new phenomenon that it is a near future that the data of DSOs and TSOs will be the new oil for the energy companies. This will be of the key importance. Now we are talking about all the EU regulations like General Data Protection Regulation and others. This is of key importance. But all in all, this is talking about the opportunities. This is about regional cooperation and about innovations and digitalization. This makes our transition smoother. This makes our transition even cost efficient.
Thank you very much. Basically, you have touched all the points that we want to cover in this panel. Collaboration, innovation, data, markets, connections. I think it's a good recipe, 5 ingredients, and we have it almost all, almost. So Lithuania is a small country. This is an international conference. I always feel compelled to talk about geography. And we have many different countries that are represented here. It's a small country which is at the border of Europe, in the Nordic part, and is bordering with Russia. And so it creates a very interesting electric island, so to say. And we will come back to that because there are some specific challenges in all island cases. Because islands, of course, have much higher constraints than if you are luckily positioned, like Boris, in the middle of the continent. So Boris Schucht, CEO of 50Hertz, one of the 4 German CEOs responsible for the eastern part of Germany, and proudly operating a grid with already 53% of renewable today, variable. Now, how do you move from 53 to 60? Because the new coalition is asking you to speed up. And how are you going to solve the challenges that were mentioned by the minister?
Yeah, thank you, Antonella. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear ministers and excellency. Thank you for having me here today. As Antonella mentioned, really 53% share of intermittent renewables safely integrated in the system, because we have, besides that, also a very, very low average interruption duration in our region. It's below 10 minutes nowadays, which is, compared to other regions in the world, really tremendous. So actually, when you look at 50 hertz, this area is a bit kind of laboratory for the energy transition and what it means to integrate safely high shares of renewables. And on the other side, we are also the proof that it works, at least with 53.4%, as the lights still are on, hopefully the whole day. As we could see in the last years. But coming back to your question, I think, first of all, I think we have to recognize that renewables are becoming the really major source, energy source in the system. And we have nowadays, when we look on the auctions in Germany, we have, even under German conditions now, 3 technologies: photovoltaics, onshore wind and offshore wind, which are on a price level somewhere around 4 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is fully competitive to other technologies, and also when you look at system costs combined with gas-fired power plants. So that means it's a development which now by itself is accelerating. And what does it change? First of all, when you look back, we had a system with only a few hundred central power plants installations. Nowadays, a very decentral generation portfolio, already 1.7 million installations in Germany. That's the first big change. The second one is we get more and more active consumers. So, and they develop even in the direction of prosumers. That means consumers who have a PV installation on their roof and maybe even a battery in their cellar to steer their own energy generation and consumption and to bring that together. Third big development is the energy consumption becomes more and more electric. That means, we have seen that in the panel before, we are talking about sector coupling, about e-mobility, of bringing the heat business more into electricity. So the energy consumption moves a bit more to electric. What are now the challenges to these 3 developments? Actually, first of all, we have simply to steer this much more decentral fleet of generation power plants safely. As long as you have only 5% wind and solar panels integrated in the system, you can just forget them. Whether you make mistakes on the forecast, yes or no, does not really matter. But as we have nowadays 53, and when they come up to 60 and more percent, this becomes more and more a real challenge. And I can tell you, renewables can also take over system responsibility, so responsibility for the safety, for the stability of the power system.
Sorry, just a second. I think this is very important. Can you just explain it a bit better? Because we heard in the first panel, in the panel before us, concerns about energy security. And there is still a lot of people that think that, well, you can do a bit of renewable, but if you go over a certain percentage, you are in very dangerous water. Can you explain a bit better how renewables can take over these system responsibilities?
Yeah, Antonella, of course I can do that. When you look on the system, how does an energy system normally works? The market, we at least in Europe believe in the market. We try to use the market as much as possible to balance out consumption and generation. And as long as you cannot store electricity very well, you need always to make sure that generation and consumption fits very well together. And the TSO is interfering when the market does not meet the exact demand, or generation does not meet exact demand, which is normally not the case because your supplier does not know when you switch on the light. And that is done by products, for example, like control power, they're called. And of course, renewable energies can also offer control power. We have today a very sunny day, and we have last year already qualified the first wind installations and PV installations in Germany that they can deliver negative control power. as we have so many renewables nowadays that we already curtail renewables on a daily basis because peak shaving is an instrument for integrating them, then when a wind farm is peak shaved, so it's curtailed, it can offer also positive control power. So the integration of renewables into these ancillary services in the control of the system, that is one of the big challenges. Let me finalize my short entrance statement. The second one, I think, is the second big challenge is how can we organize that the energy consumption, so the way how the consumer uses the energy, is following more and more, at least partly, intelligently, the intermittent generation. That means when you have a lot of energy cheaply in the system, how can you make sure that the washing machine is then running, for example, when the sun is shining, when you have a lot of PV? And that is the second big challenge. And the third big challenge is how can we optimize a system, a much more complex and decentral system. Few beliefs from my side. Firstly, I think, and we strongly believe in a market. That means the market should make the optimization of demand and supply whenever you have it. And so it's all about integrating these renewables and the new consumers, the active consumers, into the market. And that means much more decentral installations, that means much more digitalization, that means much more innovation, new technologies, and all this stuff to be able to really optimize a system with so many market participants. So actually it's about giving these market participants access to be part of the energy market and part of the energy system.
Thank you very much. So again, a couple of very important points. Markets as the main driver for stability, security, and further growth of renewables. Robert Denda is the head of network and technology and innovation at Enel, responsible for the innovation of all of Enel. Good job. How do you relate to what Boris has just said? So, of course, you are working more or less on the same parameters of this digitalization and integration. What are your key solutions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, first of all. And I think actually what Boris just said is very positive in the sense, because I think all the debate that we have here about the energy transition is, I think, still too limited. Because we focus a lot about the first biggest part, which of course is a big driver, that is renewable integration, but it's not all. Because the energy efficiency is a second point, of course, how to become more and more efficient, not only at the consumer level, but also at the generation, distribution, transmission level. So that is, I think, another very important point that adds complexity, but also brings opportunities. I think another completely different line that needs to be integrated is sustainability. I think that is another point. How can we make sure, because here, of course, if we speak about German industrialized countries, the situation is also very different, maybe from other parts of the world. So here we speak about how to give access to all of the people in the world, basically, to energy. On the other side as well, how to technically reduce and minimize, optimize the grids in the transmission, but in the perimeter that I speak of, distribution grids, in order to reduce the losses. And that's, I think, maybe another very important point to take into account. If we consider a reduction of 1% of technical losses within the grids, of course, we are reducing 1% of the overall energy transported through those grids. And that's a huge impact if you think about it, if you make the calculations. And I think that's another very important aspect, I think, on top of course, the difficulties of integration of renewables. And in terms of renewable integration, I think I'm quite aligned in the sense I see more and more distributed generation. If we take the case of one of our 8 countries where we are in Italy, Here we have over 700,000 points and users that are also actively generating in the grids, in the medium voltage and low voltage grids. And if you actually look at the numbers, almost all of them are generating in the low voltage grid. So actually the complexity is completely shifting. And I think that is something that needs to be taken into account. There's of course complexity at the high voltage grid. We have complexity on the medium voltage grid, and both of them I think are quite well known already and had an evolution over the past. And now what we add is a different level of complexity in the low voltage grid. And this is also where...
Sorry. Are you ready as a DSO and your DSOs colleagues to deal with this level of complexity at the low voltage grid?
Yes, what we do is basically, but just to add maybe, John, just for full understanding why the low voltage, because on the low voltage also the electrification of everything, the electrification of transport, e-mobility, and all of that will happen as well. So are we ready? Yes, we are. We are working on it. It's a roadmap. It's a digitalization roadmap. What Enel did already many years ago, we started putting digital technologies, creating smart grids. We started now 17 years ago with this full rollout of smart meters in Italy, for example. We have distribution automation in place in the medium voltage grid. Now we speak about an absolutely tremendous technological improvement, disruption in those technologies. Today, for example, just to give you one example, the technologies to do real-time self-healing in the medium voltage grid take less than 1 second in order to identify the fault and reconfigure the grid in order to isolate as much as possible the customers from that, let's say, faulty section. So that, and those are those technologies that you need in order to do the integration of renewables and the full electrification of society in an efficient way. You need to put digital technologies in there. And here, I think, in our case, we fully believe in smart meters as, of course, one element that you have to measure at the grid edge. We also put meters in the grid. Then you need to control elements inside the grid. And the interesting thing is that goes now ahead also towards the low voltage grid. Let's say the meters already are there, but also even the distribution automation. In the next years, we'll go more and more towards the low voltage grid. And here, on that point, I think I agree as well what has been said before. The critical point is today and will be the data flows, how to manage, let's say, the technical data, because here we are not speaking of consumption data, let's say, for billing or for the customers. We speak a lot about technical data, that grid-relevant data that can be transferred, that can be useful because the customer uses storage, has maybe an electric vehicle, has a rooftop solar panel, and all of that in combination give already use case for the customer, but can also make a very relevant use case for the DSO. And those are things we need to construct jointly in the energy system.
So thanks a lot. Žygimantas, you mentioned that by 2030, half of your electricity will be from renewable energy sources. Are you sometimes worrying about energy security in such a rather near future? Shortly, because of course we continue the round.
Shortly, we are worried now, not about in 2030, but we are worried now about energy security. And the reason is not only about renewables. Renewables, this is we have quite a good infrastructure in principle, which is capable to have additional capacities of renewables, to be it wind power, to be it photovoltaics. The question is a little bit broader. The question is about the fact that we are functioning in the electricity market together with the Nordic states, but we still are in the system which is managed by Russia and Belarus. So 3 Baltic states are like the energy island in that sense. And this is, of course, the security of supply project for today's and for the future. So that's why we are moving very fastly. And I hope that this year, after 2 months in June, we will have the political agreement. And this project will be just the technical side to ensure our desynchronization from Russian and Belarusian networks and synchronization with the European continental networks. And that, when we are solving this question, of course, it will be easier then to go forward to integrate renewables, because now it's also two challenges. One of the challenges is renewables integration to the grid. Another one is our system security.
Thank you very much. So integration is also a function of solidarity with your neighbor. We will come back to that. And now we move to the next speaker, and I will exercise my Chinese language at the moment. I would like to introduce Mr. Sun Zhengyun, Chief Information Officer of State Grid China. State Grid is probably the largest company in the world with 1.72 million employees. We visited State Grid in January, and I was really impressed. Can you please tell us, China has done a huge change in the energy mix, very aggressive policies for supporting renewables, also for meeting the climate target, a very important role in the international community. So we have been discussing about the importance and the role of markets. Can you tell us something on how State Grid China, such a big company, can help to implement well-functioning markets so that renewables can really grow and prosper as it is wanted?
Okay, thank you. The renewables is really a very big challenge for the grids, for the accommodation of the grid operation. State grid have done a lot in technically and in the market-oriented way. About the market, the state grid have a trading center. Within state grid, they have a long-term, medium-term, and very short-term tradings of electricity. For the long-term trading, for every power plant, they have a base generation hour. That's the base electricity. The extra power will be put in the market. For the short term, the day ahead, within a day trading, the dispatchers, the state grid have a unified dispatching. So from the national dispatching, and the provincial, regional, and district dispatching, that's a unified dispatching. The dispatcher can coordinate the trading. The power plant and the user can bid in the platform. And then we use the digitization to realize the market mechanism to make it fair. At the very beginning, the operator, the dispatcher, will put public the transmission reserve. Everybody, the generators and the customers know which transmission line have how much capacity. That is a present situation. At the same time, we are starting the auxiliary service. Everybody knows that clean energy renewables is very good because it's clean, but it behaves bad in the grid operation because big fluctuation of the generation. So for the extra generation hours of every power plant, they will bid in the market. And during the contingency, the unified dispatching will function very well. That is only about market. About the renewable accommodation, I think the technology, the know-how is very important. Because the big fluctuation, I think the big capacity of grid is important. The bigger the capacity of the grid, the big tolerance to the fluctuation of the grid, of the renewables. And also the big capacity of transmission. In China, the renewables are located mostly in west region, and the load center are in east. The distance is about 1,000 to 3,000 kilometers away. So the state grid have developed a cutting-edge, ultra-high voltage technology that is minus plus 10,000 watts kV DC and 800 and 1000 AC voltage transmission. The high voltage, ultra-high voltage transmission play an important role for the renewables in the west region of China that can transmit to the east center of China. Most of the renewables combined with the fossil, the coal generation combined together be transmitted with a load curve every day. That's all.
Thank you very much. There is a very clear policy in picking coal, so no new coal power plants will be built in China in the near future. And already today, you have very high level of curtailment. So this means overcapacity, essentially. How do you deal in the coming years with this overcapacity? I find this very interesting, the problem of overcapacity, because we share the same problem. In the US, we have overcapacity. In Europe, we have overcapacity. In China, we have overcapacity. In the rest of the world, on the other hand, we have an increase in demand, and so it's much easier to add renewables because you don't have to kick things out. But in our part of the world, we need to have a phase-out strategy. And maybe you want to say something about that?
About the overcapacity, I think the government doesn't ratify the new coal power plant now. About the renewables, it is every province have a region, because the transmission limit in Qinghai and Western province, the renewables is also limited because of the transmission and the big fluctuation. So that is also limited. But now we are starting the technology of combined renewables. We have pilot project in Zhangjiakou city that is a renewable of wind power and photovoltaic and storage combined to a new renewable power plant. They work very well and have been in operation for several years. About the overcapacity, I think the generation over for every power plant, especially for the fossil power plant, the generation over will be limited by the government.
Thank you very much. So very often we think that we live in completely different realities. When you come to this conference, this is advertising the Energiewende, but the reality is that this Energiewende is happening everywhere in the world. And this is really useful to learn from each other. And so we are going to learn from the Nordic with Bente Haaland, Senior Executive Vice president, executive vice president at Statnett, the Norwegian grid operator, and also board member at the Renewables Grid Initiative. Bente, so what is the experience in the Nordic? Nordic was the first electricity market to be set up, and now you are also one of the first areas where you have developed some very special collaborative approaches. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, thank you, Antonella. I would really like to talk about the Nordic model that we usually call it. The Nordic countries have a long tradition of cooperating. First, we started building strong grids within the countries and also between the countries, both AC lines and also DC lines. The first DC lines from Norway to Denmark was in, I think it was 1974. So the countries are, or the region is closely linked together with strong grids. And then we started cooperating we established Nordpool, which was the power exchange, Sweden and Norway from 1996, and then all 4 countries was in like Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden from the year of 2000. So we have a long cooperation, or a long history of cooperation on both grid development and also market development. And this has proved to be a very good model. In Norway, where I come from, 40% of all the hydropower production is in the distribution grid. So we have a meshed system, and we have all renewable system, and a long tradition that this is working. And I think the 3 elements, the key elements in the Nordic model, is that we have strong grids, we have a good market, a well-functioning market, and we have a very good cooperation between the TSOs and all the players in the market. And I think going forward, these 3 factors also play the key roles going forward. We see now, as in all other countries, that the power system is changing. From 2010 to 2025, the amount of wind power in the Nordics will be 4 times as high from 2010. And we will double the interconnector capacity, the DC capacity, out of the Nordic countries. At the same time, the nuclear power plants in Sweden will be reduced, and also the coal power plants will shortly be turned down in Denmark. So the whole power system is changing, and we need to cope with this. And the 4 TSOs recently, just in March this year, signed a new agreement on how to deal with these changes, because we need to balance the system in a new way, and we also need to cooperate in a different way to find new solutions to the common challenges. Actually, 2 years ago, Statnett, Fingrid, Energinet, and Svenska Kraftnät, the 4 TSOs, wrote this report called the Challenges in the Nordic Power Systems. What we did was to sit down to agree upon what are the key challenges looking forward. And tomorrow we're going to launch this report, where you can find on the internet. It's in English, where all the solutions to the challenges are suggested. And that is a roadmap pointing out what to do in the system operation, market solutions, power grid development, and also ICT solutions to supply the solutions that are necessary to meet the challenges that we see. And we need to collaborate in all these areas, both the TSOs, but also on the political side, the high-level political side, and also in each country, the TSOs and the DSOs.
So, Bente, Robert mentioned before this digitalization and the fact that most of the renewable integration is happening at low voltage. How do you handle this collaboration between TSOs and DSOs? This is quite an hot topic in some countries, not in all countries. For example, Boris is getting along very well with his DSOs, but this is not always the case across the globe. Is there some lesson from the Nordic on how to constructively collaborate TSOs and DSOs?
Each country has their own kind of strategy or plan for creating the data hubs. Norway, we are at the end of the project and the data hub, collecting all the data from the smart meters will be finished in February next year. And then Denmark and Sweden and Finngrid also have their projects that will be finished within the next few years. This is also explained in this report. And I think first we need to have to solve the problems at home. So we need to find solutions at home, how to deal with the data. And then when all the data hubs are working fine, we have to find solution in order to share the data so that we can have good ICT solutions on the top of the customer's data. But that will be the next step. In Norway, we just had this project where Statnett and 10 of the big companies went together to look at the TSO-DSO challenges. How are we going to solve the bottlenecks in the systems? What are the key challenges in this relationship? And I also think that we have to investigate what are the key challenges and how to solve this going forward. But this is a big discussion, and this is a process that we need to do in common.
There was a mobile phone telling us that maybe I should ask Boris, do you have a special recipe on how to deal with the DSOs? How do you overcome sometimes the perceived conflict of interest?
It's a difficult point because, of course, there are certain conflicts on the question who is responsible for what. The system of the future looks very different than the system that we have today. And I will give you an example. Let's, for example, take e-mobility. E-mobility, we made an analysis, we can integrate as many cars in Germany, electric cars, as you want to, so every car could be an electric car and we would not face any problems on the total energy supply or on the high voltage grids. On the DSO grids, on the low voltage grids, that's a completely different cup of tea. When you do it in a stupid way, so just allowing that everybody charge at the evening at 8 o'clock when he comes home, at the same time when the evening peak in the system is anywhere there and there is no PV anymore, then it would mean you can only integrate 2 to 5 or 5 to 10% of the cars that we have today on an electric basis. Otherwise, when you want to integrate more and you do not do it smartly, then you would create a huge new investment in DSO grids in the last mile, which costs the society unnecessarily a huge amount of money. So therefore, it makes a lot of sense to bring intelligence in there for this local congestions. So to actually to allow there are different systems, you can be more market-oriented or more regulatory-based, that not everybody charges at the same time. And when you do it in a very optimal way, you can see that every household in Germany could have 4 cars, statistically, without any need for further investments in the grid. So that shows how big this range is. But when you have now electric cars integrated, they can also participate in giving in a solution for global congestions. When we have on the high voltage line somewhere a congestion, and we need to make sure that both the DSOs and TSOs have access to the flexibility that new technology in the system offers. That's, for example, one of the challenges. And then, of course, there is always a question, who is responsible for what? I would say that is more or less a good competition on ideas between different institutions. On the end of the day, we are both responsible to do that in a serious manner, in the optimal way for the society.
We will come back to that. I'm sure I see Robert wanting to, but now it's time to introduce Katherine Hamilton. She is the chair of a public policy consultancy specializing in clean energy called 38 North Solution. Very nice name. And at the same time, she is also co-chair of the Council for the Future of Energy at the World Economic Forum, where we met, actually. So very nice to meet you again. We have been talking about smart meters, smart charging, smart solution. What about smart humans?
Yeah, we haven't yet talked about humans, and it turns out we're all humans, but it's the last thing we're talking about. I see, and this is all part of what our council did, which was to think about how do we go to an energy transition of a low-carbon future. How do we phase down fossil? How do we create good policy? How do we make sure everybody has access? And then what are the key human elements to this? Because we ignore them at our peril. So the first chunk of human human issues would be, to me, engagement. And we've talked a lot about this, the Internet of Things. And as Boris said, humans can be a resource. A consumer, a prosumer, can be a resource in addition to being a load. Consumers are used to being connected. Everyone, even developing countries, are having smart technologies, right? Smartphones by which they run their business. They're not just phones. People don't think of them as phones. They think of them as their business. They think of them as control. They think of them as choice and an ability to interact with the system, to interact with others. Utilities are pretty slow to get that going and to make sure that consumers really have those choices. And yet it's so powerful, and we have to think about that more intentionally. So that's the kind of the connected piece of it. The second piece is the fact that when we go through this energy transition, there are a lot of people being left behind. In the US, the whole coal industry has been left behind. Those workers in Appalachia, where a lot of my family is from, don't have jobs. They haven't had jobs in years. And yet the jobs aren't coming to them. They're in areas that were very rich in coal. They're also, as it turns out, rich in solar and wind, but we haven't thought about that intentionally. And I think it's something we cannot lose track of, is the fact that there are winners and losers, but we don't want people to lose. Because when you get disenfranchised, then you start turning against the very system that you need to be a part of. So I think we have to think about workers in transition. We also have to think about the utility sector and a lot of workers that are aging. And how do we get young people not just interested in building disruptive apps, but interested in coming and working in the utility sector in DSOs and TSOs as part of this cool new energy transition, and being part of creating energy access and making sure humans are involved. So in my mind, there's the connectivity part where people can engage more, but there's also the part that people have become very disengaged in, and those are all of those workers that have been left behind, and we really need to think about that intentionally.
We talked about prosumers. Is this a way to engage people, to get them a bit more, interested, active?
Yeah, I think people are not generally, just other than us, are not that interested in energy. They're interested in their life, in their lifestyle. What is going to make sure they keep track of their kids? What's going to make sure they keep track of their crops or their business or whatever it is that they're thinking about on a daily basis that does not have to do with energy. It has to do with their lives. So how do we get them to care? We give them solutions that are services and products that enable them to engage. Now, in areas where there are lack of jobs, you still need the ability for people to engage and trying to bring those new technologies in, because technology is still, for consumers, pretty cost effective. It's not very expensive to get a phone that you can use for a lot of different things, and people will buy phones before they'll buy a battery for their basement. So I think that's how you're going to enable people, is to make sure that you don't create it in the service of making sure that your DSO and TSO operate efficiently, but instead allow consumers to really be part of something that's more than energy.
Thanks a lot. I always try to bring the humans in this energy discussion because, without them we don't need electricity, no? So what? Žygimantas, how do you involve your voters, not just consumers?
That's a very good question, because just before answering to your question, I mean, I think that the key challenge for us today is that we are not talking about two different systems of the centralized system with very clear lines and clear responsibilities of generators, transmission system operators, distribution system operators, and the consumers. We are talking about not only about the decentralized system, but also talking about the transition towards that system. So this challenge is like a double, because this transition, it needs also more technical preparedness. Talking about the voters, here is the quite important question, because now also in Lithuania we're creating the scheme for the prosumers. Of course, this is quite a similar scheme what we have in Europe, but in principle, during this process, it's a challenge also for the consumer to behave in a different way than it was before, because we can create the best system on having a small permissions to install this PV on your roof. We can have less of bureaucracy. We can have incentives. We can have the system which is user-friendly for the consumer. But the key question is that the consumer as such should be well informed about his capacities and capabilities. And that's the question that consumer also should think not only about today's benefits being a prosumer, but also tomorrow, about the benefits for tomorrow, what he will have. This is not only about the payback period of solar power, for example, solar PVs, but also about the possibility to be the master of your home day, to be a master of the electricity which you're consuming. And that's a quite important factor, and that's the responsibility not only of the politicians, not only of the transmission system operators, of distribution system operators, or the regulators. This is a joint work of all of us. And I think that in case the consumers will be involved in that system, this transition from the decentralized system, from centralized system to decentralized system, it will be more easier to go forward.
So I can agree with that, but in this digitalized race, do we really need people to think, or just we need a chip? Robert, you talked about digitalization, and then I would also like to hear from the others. And can we not just digitalize all of this, and the machine will start when it starts and when you receive a signal, and therefore we need real-time pricing? How do you see the world coming up?
Yeah, there's of course, let's say, the tendency is there, let's say, that the machines speak to each other, and let's say also, of course, home automation, let's say, if you speak about storage, integration, all of this, at some point you need a certain time of real-time communication. I think what is very important of this, we should not mix the things, let's say. On one side, I think it's very important that the customer, the citizen, at the end has the right to choose what he wants to do, how he wants to use the energy, for what reason the energy is used. On the other side, there's the opportunity of integrating on the technology side the different elements in order to facilitate everything basically that we spoke about here today, including the whole energy transition. So the digitalization is a trend that is not stoppable. We see it, and actually the customers, the citizens, many times are even further ahead with their digitalization. If you look at the home, what they digitalize.
But maybe we should talk about automation rather than digitalization.
Yes,
this is almost the next step, no? You digitalize, yeah, and then you automate.
For us, let's say automation, but this is a terminology issue, I think, just is of course it's a previous step, let's say, or part of the digitalization. If we look at the grids, what we did first, let's say, we put smart meters and automized, let's say, the management of the distribution grid.
Maybe I can tell the audience that Enel was the first one to deploy smart meters, but everyone is thinking that those smart meters were pretty stupid. So let's see.
Well, I hope that's not everybody. This is What is true, of course, that being the first player, that is a risk that you always have. We did this in the year 2000 we started. Today we are deploying our third generation of smart meters, and we are operating 44 million smart meters. And I would not say that they are stupid because
smart meters
they... No, just
State Grid China deployed?
400 million.
400 million.
Yeah,
I thought this is incredible, 400 million.
It's really play an important role in the service of customers. Yeah, we know a lot of information, the habit of the users, and then we can serve them better. Yeah.
Are you going, I'm asking all of you actually, are you going to use smart meters to move into real-time pricing or different type of electricity pricing?
If you like, I answer from one side. If you look at the Spanish market, for example, there is a complete dynamic price for those that have not changed to the liberalized market. There's millions of customers that use hourly values in that sense. They are built with a wholesale price of the day-ahead market with a delta for the commercialization part. And the only way of doing this is smart metering. And this is, let's say, one key factor. This is in the Spanish part, it's hourly. In the Italian side, we capture 15-minute curves for the customer. So all types of dynamic schemes can be produced on that. There are some, for example, some retailers that say certain hours of the week that the customer can choose are, for example, for free. And these type of offers can only be built if you have, let's say, real consumption.
So we will see more and more of this. And Katherine, do you think that this dynamic pricing is a fundamental step towards enabling demand response and really maybe even efficiency, flexibility service?
Yes, definitely. And I think we're ready for that in the utilities sector now that we do have smart grids and we know much more what to do with the data, the gazillion bytes of data that it's been collecting all this time. What can we do with it? Because regulators aren't going to let consumers be overcharged. They're very concerned about making sure that they're fair prices for consumers, right? So the issue is, how do you make sure that consumers are ready to respond to this? I think since we have tolls, surge pricing on Uber, consumers are used to thinking more about, and certainly the commercial and industrial sector has been doing this for years, but consumers on a residential level are much more used to thinking about, oh, I'll have to pay more for this if I did do it at a certain time. So I think we're ready for that, but I also think we have to make it really easy. So people have to be able to put in their preferences. What do I want to do? Because I have 4 kids, nobody's going to tell me when I'm doing my laundry. I'm going to do it when it gets this high. I don't care what time of day. So I'll pay the surge price. So the issue is, consumers have to have it really easy. They have to have all the information that they need to make those choices, and then they have to be able to make those choices. And then the utilities have to know what they are so that they'll know what to expect on the grid.
Very good. I would like to invite Danel with the questions from the Twitter community.
All right, so we've selected 2 questions. Thank you very much for them. And first up, we have Mr. Marcus Muller, who has a question for Mr. Schucht. What do you think about grid boosters? So large-scale BSS operated by grid operators, highly topical in EU Winter Package Electricity Market Design Directive and ownership of storage for TSOs. Completely different from the market approach Mr. Schucht just praised. Shall I go to the next one? Please. This question is from Ms. Kaiser Herrenberg. Question to Minister Vaičiūnas and Ms. Haaland. Should the Nordic grid and common market be expanded to include the Baltics?
Boris, you go first.
The first part, I think I need shortly to explain what grid boosters are. Actually, one of the big challenges in Germany is the energy transport from the north to the south, because most of the wind power is in the north of Germany, but the consumer centers are in the south and in the west. And as everybody knows, acceptance is one of the big challenges. So one idea is to leave the classic way of realizing the N-1 security. And how? So we can utilize only the existing grids with 75%, because we keep the rest for the N-1 security. That means when one element, when one tower falls, the rest of the system can take over in this millisecond the energy supply. Of course, you can technically do that differently by big batteries on the one side and power electronics on the other side. So it's also a bit about digitalization with high voltage. So to have a big battery, and the battery then replaces that line in this millisecond when a line is, for example, by an incident interrupted. And by that you can utilize additionally 25% of your, roughly 25% of your transport capacities. I think we will go in this direction. It's one of the clear innovative tasks for us as a TSOs in Central Europe to develop the needed technologies together with the suppliers, and we are committed to that, and we are on the roadmap to that. So in 10, 15 years we will see these elements in the grid, and I'm pretty sure the technology will be developed.
Do you already have this technology in China? Do you know about that?
Presently, we don't have, because storage is a big, very, very big problem for a big capacity. You know, we have pilot project only a small capacity, that is 70 megawatts, maybe. I mean the pilot project for the renewable combination, wind, solar, and storage. For the big capacity, I think the only the pump storage. Yeah.
So this booster will reduce the need for grids.
Yes, it will be not cheaper, but it will reduce the need for grid, and by that, hopefully, it gets a little bit more public acceptance.
Well, I hope that you are a bit faster than 15 years then. Bente, so Norway and Lithuania, no, let's say, Bente, you are from Norway. Can you maybe bring back to the Nordic the idea of including Lithuania in your market, or how do you see that? And I'm sure there has been a lot of discussion about this option.
Yes, there are big discussions, and I think it's a good cooperation as well. And as far as I know, you're looking towards the continent to synchronize the systems. But I guess that we will have discussions between the countries and also within the NSOE on these questions. Would you like to comment on this?
Thank you. I think that, as always, the story is evolving in stages. So I just remember 2011, when the Baltic states was declared that this is the energy island. At that time, we had only one interconnection, Estonia-Finland interconnection with the Nordics. So that was in 2011. Then at the beginning of 2016, we increased our integration with Nordics, I mean market integration, by the interconnection of Lithuania and Sweden. So now we are integrated into the Nordics market, and we are benefiting from this market. We're really thankful for all this cooperation, not only infrastructure building jointly, but also having all these instruments, I mean Nord Pool spot, and so on. This was really beneficial for our markets. And that's the clear message that all our consumers now they are benefiting from being the part of the Nordics market. That's the fact, that's the current day. Now we are talking about the future, about the integration of our systems. This is a different question than the market one. And this is purely a technical question, because I know that it was debates for 2 years before about for Baltic states to be synchronized with Nordics or with the continental European network through Poland. So this question is already practically solved, having in mind that now we have, for the market, we have DC connections, and for the system integration, we need to have AC connections, and that's the key difference. So now this question is principally solved. All the 3 Baltic states agrees that the only technical and economically rational way to synchronize is towards continental European networks through Poland. Just now we are finalizing the 2 studies, and it will be the question about what could be the technical elements to synchronize with the continental European network. So I believe that this 3rd step of integration, not only market integration, but also system integration, will be finalized soon.
Very good. And this points me to the fact that actually we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate across the voltage level, but we also need to collaborate with our neighbors. And this is probably one of the key messages that I want to deliver from this panel, that collaboration is a must if we really want to progress in the best possible way. Now, in the previous panel, I believe it was the Polish speaker, the Polish deputy minister, who said, we need storage, 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 storage. I would like to challenge this, and I would like to hear from you. Do we really need storage, 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 or do we rather need flexibility, where storage is one important component of flexibility? And we start with Katherine, because I see that she's already jumping on that.
I love storage. I've been working on storage since the 80s, when our utility was deploying storage. I call storage the bacon of the grid, because it makes everything else better. And I don't eat bacon, but a lot of people like bacon. So storage is just energy management. It's an energy management tool, right? It can be anything. Storage can be water. Storage can be a battery. Storage can be just a system. It can be, it can be mass. It can be anything. It's just an energy management tool. So I feel like the issue is flexibility, and the issue is response. So we need to be able to have response in real time, and if that means a system that is fully connected, and Boris talked about this, how you can manage solar and wind off of each other in combination with demand response, with efficiency, with consumer engagement. I mean, storage is important, and I think we've gotten to the point where it's certainly in the States, it's become much more cost effective, and I think that will continue to be such, and I think it will continue to be a key part of the system, as everything is, but I think it's the flexibility that we want, and we have to be able to compensate. We need to be able to pay the services that all of those different flexible resources provide to the grid in order to continue to make them viable and cost effective.
May I? Oh, sorry.
I think there is another solution. The state grid have a large service area and a large installed capacity. For the first contingent and the second contingent of the grid, we use a lot of combined relay protection. With, according to the specific situation of the area grid. If the trunk transmission line is tripped, there is an imbalance between 2 areas. So one area is a trip of the load. Automatically, we have a contract with the users. Another area that is over generation, we trip the generators. So the 2 sides are also balanced. We have many that kind of combined relay protections, because the large area of service and large installed capacity of generators.
Thank you. Boris?
Maybe one additional comment. All our calculations and all our studies have shown that at least in the Central European environment, you can say you can integrate up to 70%, something in this range, renewables without thinking about additional flexibility or storage. You have the flexibility by the additional gas power plants that you have anywhere there as complementary power plants. You have that anywhere. So all our calculations, not only from us, but also from very independent institutions show that. We have currently in Germany the debate on increasing the target for 2030 to 65%. And actually, in our calculations, this comes now close to the point where you have to start to think about storage. We are not ready yet with all this analysis, but it seems that this is somewhere the range where you have to start to think about. As long as you are below that, it's a very expensive solution. There are much cheaper solutions.
Of course, this is geographically defined. If you are in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal, in Lithuania also, then probably you need it a bit earlier. Depends on your how well interconnected you are. If you are an electric island, you need flexibility much earlier. I know you want to talk, but I have two topics that I want to cover still, and time is running. And you can talk about any of the two, or if you really want, about something else. I would like to talk about electrification, and not just electrification of transport, but the broad electrification. If we think that, or if we believe that this cost reduction that we are seeing today for renewables will continue, we can imagine that we will live in a world with close to zero marginal cost of electricity. And if this is the case, then we can really start about thinking what are the processes that we want to or can electrify. So some reflection on this. And the other topic for you to pick is how do we design grid tariffs in a way that are fair, acceptable, and still stimulated the required investments. So I see everyone is now but less keen, but Robert, you have the microphone, so just go ahead.
I want to actually say something about the storage. The previous point.
Too easy. Now it's too easy. Now
was too easy. No, so I will say something about the electrification then. I think here the electrification of everything, so the shift towards electricity as the source is a trend that is happening. So the question is maybe different. The question is maybe how to integrate this, no? And for this we come back again. I think the technologies are there. The technologies are becoming sufficiently cost effective to do that. And so what needs to be done, and this depends again on the geography, then is, let's say, to take the right actions. Because in some cases, it's probably the best scenario is to invest in a certain part, in other parts, let's say you need to invest in another part of the market. So I think that's the key. At the end, I think we will all see that grids need to be digitalized in order to allow for that electrification at distribution, at transmission level, the home itself as well. This is a trend that is unstoppable. And if you bring all of this together, it's a key of the regulator and also of the market to make sure that this happens, let's say, in the most cost-effective way.
Now you talk about digitalization. I think this is your main topic. What about cybersecurity? Are you not afraid of that?
Of course, cybersecurity is a point that needs to be taken into account from the beginning by design. And that's another point that I think before you mentioned, and we spoke a little bit about the data that needs to be transferred, in order to make this electricity system of the future work. Of course, it needs to be based on open protocols. It needs to be based on cyber-secure mechanisms there. That is clear, of course. That is a concern, and I think it's a concern for all the players and needs to be taken into account from the beginning.
So now we have three topics. This is the electrification, how do we make fair grid tariffs, and cybersecurity. We are enlarging the discussion. We can stay here until dinner. Who takes the next one? Bente.
I would like to talk a little bit about grid tariffs. We have this big discussion now in Norway because we see from the transmission grid that the tariff will be 3 times as high as in 2012, just within a couple of years. And at the same time, the distribution grids are investing a lot. And also, you need to pay taxes on the top of the tariffs. So we see a big discussion in Norway now how to deal with this, because nobody wants to pay. And it's the end users that will end up with a bill. And this discussion is quite difficult, I think, because it's all about the energy vendor, which you need to rebuild the grids, you need to invest. But the model that we see today, it's only like the end users that has to pay.
Sorry, are we not creating the problem ourselves? Because transmission and distribution remains a share of the total energy bill. Generation is more expensive still. So are we not creating this in the mindset of consumers, that this is expensive and we cannot afford it?
What they see is that the energy price is getting lower and lower, so the part of the bill from the grid is getting higher. And this is quite difficult to understand. So I think we need to explain this, to make a narrative, to explain, because the bill is not that high compared to other expenses that you do have as a customer. But I don't think that people really understand how the bill is kind of designed and what you really pay for. So I think the energy sector need to explain this in a better way, and also make sure that the grid or the tariff is paid by more than just the end users. We see in Norway today that 50% of the cost or the investments in grid is caused by new production, but they have a limitation in how much they can pay for the tariffs given by the EU. So it's, I think this is a challenge that we need to discuss, how to deal with this going forward. Otherwise, I don't think we will have public acceptance for all the construction that we need to do in order to reach the targets.
So this is a challenge for all policymakers to think it through and find, probably together with the industry and the broad society.
And also the energy taxes on the top of it. So it's the whole package in the bill that we need to look at in a new way.
Anyone else on this topic? Katherine?
Tariffs or?
Yeah, tariffs, fairness.
Yeah, a quick point, one more quick point on storage. If you get seasonal storage, it'll take care of your 30%. I hate to see us leaving potential solutions on the table. So I want to make sure that we're taking them off the table, which is like fuel cells, hydrogen, CHP, biomass, geothermal. I just want to make sure that we don't, in this rush to electrify and put in batteries, that we don't leave value behind. And when you think of value, the utilities in the US, a lot of them are not competitive, they're not deregulated. So for us, performance-based rates are going to be really important to move to rather than cost of service rates. And what that does is that creates for the utility a sense of needing to provide a service to the customer and make sure that their performance could be rated on any number of metrics. It could be rated on CO2 or on reliability or on cyber security preparedness. You can create whatever metrics you want, but I think utilities, in fact, themselves have said we would much rather have our ability to change our business model based on performance rather than based on cost of service, and I think you're going to see a change.
So markets and performance and fairness, politics. Boris, do you want to say something about cybersecurity? This is...
Maybe one, because we are talking about digitalization, and digitalization is one of the big keys for successful energy transition. I think we all believe nowadays in that. Cybersecurity, I think, is one of the big challenges ahead of us. I'm not so much afraid because the governments are heavily working on that to define criteria on how the IT should be certificated on the TSO, DSO generator side. But I'm much more afraid what happens behind and before the meter. So what happens, for example, I drive a nice i3 and looked on my app, so I can charge and discharge it via my iPhone, so I can switch on. So many i3s from BMW electric cars are not yet driving on the road, but maybe in 10 years, by that, when somebody hacks this app, he can switch off the whole energy system. So these are all applications which are outside of the control of the energy system and of the parties involved in the energy system. And we see more and more of these applications. To give you an example, Samsung can switch off all TVs which are connected somehow by WLAN with the system, and because it's a huge amount, it has an impact. Or the converters of PV installations, there's one big company who is producing them. They are all also connected to the internet, and they could be hacked and switched off. So this is one question that we have really to answer more than we do today. We have to find answers on that with a more digital world and a more digital approach in the energy system. We have to find an answer on cybersecurity, which we do not have yet.
And we will not have it for some time, because this is such a fast. Close. I would like to take from each of you a statement, a closing remark, whatever you want to say, and then we will invite Danel to get. Is Danel coming back on stage or not? Yeah, but we don't take questions anymore. So, okay, we take a statement from each of you. And then we shall see what happens next. Maybe we start with you, because you have been too quiet. I understand the challenge of the language.
Yes, the language
I really
is very
admire
big
you on
challenge.
this panel, I must say.
The language is a very big challenge for me. Also, I'd like to talk something about the cybersecurity. It's really a big challenge for the utilities, because the digitization is indispensable for the utilities, for the grid operation, as well as customer service. We have done a lot of work in two aspects. One is for the grid operation. The SCADA and EMS system that is completely isolated from the outside. We have dedicated telecommunication, dedicated RTU, and dedicated centralized computer. That's for the SCADA and EMS system. And for the managerial, for the customer service, we have tried many schemes, and we have also a team, two teams. One is a fund attack every day, another defend every day to make access, to find some problems, to find some problem with the network. That is what we have done. That is really a big problem, because the digitization is indispensable for us. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, this is a very hot topic, not only for you, but for everybody. You want to be next, Žygimantas? Yes, please.
I think I would like to turn to the interest of the consumers. So first of all, probably this is the question concerning the electrification. So always the consumers has the interest of security of supply, that it will be a supply without the intermittency. The next thing is about the prices. Here we talked about the dynamic pricing. And the third interest is, of course, to have the comfort. So all this electricity, all technologies and electricity developments are good to answering these challenges and this interest of the consumers. So I really believe that we have no other choice, just electrification. And I believe that electricity will become a new energy, a new currency of energy. That's for the electrification, and of course, this is the question of the cybersecurity. We are talking about as a possible threat, but this is actually the facts. It's taking place. For example, in Lithuania last year, we had from all the cyber attacks, 37% was in the energy sector. So it means that we are under attack, but we are also solving these questions. When you have challenges, you are becoming more stronger. So we are answering to this, and for example, in our new energy strategy, which is now in the parliament, we made also very clear that for the consumer, not only affordable prices, not only security of supply, not only renewable energy, but also cybersecurity is very important. And this is in the strategy, and we are moving forward with the tactical measures. In Lithuania, we have NATO Security Center of Excellence, which is working also on the cybersecurity things. And that's in our agenda. And I think that in case the life is dynamic, so all the new entering to the electrification is making also new challenges. So let's turn to 1973, when the concept of energy security was invented. At that time, cybersecurity was not the concept which was important, just affordable prices and security of supply. So now to the description of the energy security, cybersecurity should be the new thing to be added, and not only to be added, but also to be worked out and to ensure that our consumers are cyber secure.
Very good. So a real businessman, each challenge turns into an opportunity. Very good. Who's next? Bente?
Yep. We strongly believe that the future is electric, as we have said in many years, but we also think that it's digital, and the digital solutions is a key for the power system going forward. I would like to tell a little story about how the system works today, and I think this is a positive story for the future going forward. And it's about Denmark and Norway and the cooperation, the collaboration between the DSOs in each countries. The Danish system has really been transformed since 2005. I think it's about 40% renewables now, and it was a thermal system like 15 years ago. And some days it's all renewable production in Denmark. And mostly wind. And those days we, of course, import kind of cheap wind power from Denmark and are very happy to be able to store the water in our hydro reservoirs at these days. And this is, of course, fixed by good market solutions and a good collaboration between the TSOs. And in the opposite way, when it's not blowing in Denmark, we can produce hydropower from the Norwegian mountains and we can export it to Denmark. But then it's the days where it's heavy winds, and Denmark are exporting a lot of power to Norway, and our machines are kind of standing in a standby position. And then suddenly it's too heavy winds, so the windmills shut down. And then you really see how the systems are collaborating in a perfect way together. Just in I don't know, some 30 minutes or so, you have to change from 1,700 megawatt of imports to Norway to 1,700 megawatts of exports from Norway. And that is 3,400 megawatts change in the Norwegian system, and also the ramping of the interconnectors. And at these times, yes, you can have good systems, automatic system, but you need to take up the phone and call for production in the mountains. And this we have seen more episodes where this is happening, and it works perfectly well. We have good reserve markets, but we also have very good system operators that make this happen. And I think when we're building getting the new Norlink cable from Norway to Germany in operation, and also the new interconnector to the UK, this will be the situation. So yes, we can have good digital systems, but we need to collaborate and we need to have a good relationship with our neighbors in order to get the best out of the systems.
Thanks a lot. This is a very important message. And for all of you who do not know, Statnett has produced an app. It's called Balance. And you can really operate the grid on this app. And if I remember well, if you get to level 17, you can apply for a job at Statnett. Robert, are you the next one?
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea, by the way. No, that's no, just
Sorry, this app has been in the top 10 for many, many months worldwide. It's been downloaded millions of times. So it's really cool.
Cool, yeah. No, from my side to add, of course, we believe that the future is electric, that is clear, that the future is digital, that also that the digital technologies that enable the energy transition are the same digital technologies that help with energy efficiency, if we look at it from the grid perspective, of course, and they help with sustainability. So I think also that all of those aspects should be taken into account, and also the enabling, of course, of what we discussed here today, of an active role of the citizens in the energy world, and all of this becomes at the end of the same question. Let's say, in moving towards a new energy system, which is unstoppable in my belief, through digital technologies, is a big challenge. I agree with what we said today, but I think it's also a huge opportunity of really pushing forward all of those goals that we mentioned.
Katherine, you are the next one.
I'm going to use your collaborative word. I think it is up to all of us here, policymakers, government leaders, innovators, solutions providers, utilities, NGOs, industry players. All of us are responsible to make sure that we create the conditions in this energy transition to make sure that consumers are able to engage and participate, take ownership of, and really benefit from the transition, and then we will be successful.
Thank you. And Boris, final word?
She said to me, keep it very short, so I will try it. So I think actually the debate showed today, once again, very nice. The whole energy transition means a lot of changes for the industry, changes for the society. So digitalization as part of this energy transaction, of course, means that too. I like the opportunities in that, and let's go for the opportunities jointly. Then we can make that a success. And I can promise you next year we come up then with 56, 57% or whatever. Thank you very much.
Very good. So we have been talking about the need for optimizing the system, and maybe as a recommendation for the organizer, next year if there is a panel on grid infrastructure, we may want to have some gas grid operator, because really we need to keep the price of this transformation as low as possible, but you also need to be very, very fast in implementing the necessary step. And maybe looking at gas infrastructure is also an idea. I thank all these fantastic panelists. Thank you very much for your time and your insight. And of course, thank a lot to you for being with us. I have a message.